But just want to ask you, Maya, thank you so much for joining me, for sharing with me. I'm Dvora Entin. I'm joining you from Philadelphia on behalf of Yesh Tikva. And this will be a kind of casual but hopefully informative conversation between two people who are passionate about the work of supporting those that are going through infertility, each of us experiencing our own struggles with that in different ways. And just looking at this as an opportunity for us to connect on something so powerful. I loved your documentary. I recommend it to all of my clients when I feel it's appropriate, and just have found it to be such an authentic and just so truthful in the way that you put out your story to the world. And I think it's a brave thing to do. And ultimately, I just want to talk to you a little bit about what you presented in that story, and also just have a casual conversation with somebody who I admire and respect from the other side of the country. And so how about if you start, one of the things that I, kind of to jump in, can you just give us a little bit of background of how you came to put this documentary together, just in a brief kind of foundational?
Sure. So we didn't really set out, my husband's a television producer. Yeah, my husband's a why can't I speak? My husband is a television producer, and I'm a clinical social worker. And when we started this journey to parenthood, we didn't know we were on a journey to parenthood, right? We were in our early 30s and just having a little bit of difficulty. But when we went to see our reproductive endocrinologist for the first time, which was about 2 years after I'd been trying naturally with some support from my OB, Clomid, some sort of the basics. But when we first decided to go see an RE, we just decided to document it. And it sounds very bizarre, actually, when I say it out loud. Like, why bring a camera? And actually, our good friend was one of our camera guys, or the director of photography. His name's Gabe. And, we were like, come on, Gabe, let's go. To us, it was totally normal to do something like that, because the three of us met in college at Berkeley. We were all in film classes together. We met in film classes. We documented everything. And the intention initially was, maybe we would need to do some kind of assisted reproductive technology, maybe IVF, which felt really scary to me at the time. And if that happened, we wanted some kind of little document, 5 minutes or something, for our child, so we can share the different ways that babies are made. And that just felt like a good idea to me at the time. And then as my life kind of fell into the abyss of reproductive technologies, I started really looking around for other stories or something that I could connect to and feel like, okay, I get it. I'm understanding it. Other people go through this. And I just wasn't finding anything that represented my experience. Mm-hmm. And so then I started really understanding the different shame and the stigma that people felt going through this. And I was like, hold up, I have a medical condition. Why do I need to feel shame? And yet I did have moments of feeling really broken, or like my body is failing, or it's not working. And of course, the language around fertility stuff, you failed an IVF cycle, like, doesn't help the situation. Right. But I was new to this world, and I had no friends going through it. Everybody I knew was pregnant, sometimes with their second kid. I mean, we had one friend who had his fifth kid, hit a set of twins. And I was like, I don't even know where to live anymore, And it was just this overwhelming feeling. And I started to write a blog called Don't Count Your Eggs. And through that experience, I had different people writing in from all over the world, from Australia, South Africa, just New Zealand, just all over, sharing their story, validating what I was going through. And I went, whoa, what we're going through in the privacy of our own home, behind very closed, tight doors, right, is really the story of so many people around the world. And nobody's talking about it, or they're talking about it, but it's very private, and nobody really knows what it's like. And it's important to share with the community, but I think it's also really important to share with the not community, because there's a disconnect in the experience, And so, again, so we just kept filming because that felt normal to us. And after, I'm going to sort of blow parts of the movie here, but after the egg donation cycle that we went through with my sister didn't work, it was really a low point for us, and also a moment of feeling, I mean, we had hundreds of hours of footage by this time too. Years had gone by. We've done IVF and IUIs and, you know, whatnot. And we started to feel that, okay, there's actually a really important story we felt that should possibly be out there. Now, we had no idea how to get it out there. We couldn't make a baby at the time, but maybe we could make a film. And yeah, and so it just became this creative project for us, and a really cathartic one for both of us. I think especially for my husband, because he's a bit more introverted than I am, to be able to talk about it and share and explore and interview other people who'd made families in different ways. And it gave us something tangible that we could create together.
Right. Was there a point where you felt like, okay, at this point we have to make a decision about becoming public about our story, since so many people like are so private about this experience? Like you said, it's so closed door. It's such a closed door experience. Was there a moment in time where it just happened kind of naturally for you?
You know, as a psychotherapist myself, I struggled with how much do I share, and is that good for my potential clients, and, you know, all that kind of stuff. But I think the social worker advocate in me took the lead, I guess. And I never really had a moment of hesitation. I had a moment of hesitation in the very, very beginning. But once I started blogging, I didn't do that anonymously. I had my name. I had a disclaimer that I am a therapist in real life, but I'm also a patient. And I think that's real. And I think that it was just important to be real. And it felt to me that it was more important to share on this more global level and connect with people and support people through the film or my writing or however I could. And I would really touch more people in that way than I would in my, you know, small private practice in LA. Kind of. So my husband, and it's interesting because I sometimes wonder, or my husband and I talk about, had this been male fertility problems, I wonder if he would have been as gung-ho open about it.
Right.
And he now, looking back, feels like he would have, or he would have wanted to be, but I don't know if at the time that would have been true.
Right. What about parents? Did you get any kind of like pushback? I know so many mothers will be like, why are you sharing that in public? You know, why are you putting that out in the public sphere?
Yeah. With my family, no. My dad is a writer, and he really is all about life experiences being ones to share and connect. And that's his. My husband's family, on the other hand, never outright said, don't do something, but I think we're a bit uncomfortable and did say things about, you know, privacy and that kind of stuff. And, you know, at the end of the day, we made the decision for ourselves, and that was it.
And for the benefit of everybody out here who's gotten to see it and learn from it. Absolutely. So talk to me a little bit about, you really put out there a very beautiful representation of a relationship between husband and wife. And as we know, you know, data statistics really show us that couples can really struggle when going through fertility treatments and the struggle to have a family and to grow their family. Talk to me a little bit about how do you preserve the relationship, and what was that like? You know, we saw it in that 1 hour, you know, documentary, but talk to me about what it was like over the years that it took to put this together.
Yeah, it's hard. And I think we were pretty open with that. You see tension between us. I mean, we love each other very much. We were together for 10 years before we started trying to have a child. So I think we had a pretty solid foundation, but nobody's prepared for this. You don't have the language to talk about it. You know, it's very typical, I think, or very common that, you know, one partner, usually the woman, I don't want to be gender specific, but, you know, is very locked in and sometimes obsessive, and it's our bodies that go through all this stuff. And the husband really wants to make it better, you know, or the partner who's not going through the physical elements of it, you know, tries to be a cheerleader, wants to say everything's going to be okay, or we're going to figure it out. And I think it took a little bit of shifting how we communicated about certain things. And I needed to learn to really respect his process of internalizing and making sense of what was going on. And he had to give space for my need for, you know, constant dialogue and, you know, intensity about it. And so we had to really learn to, like, you know, and it's funny because after being together for 10 years, it's like, okay, we have to learn to communicate, but around this stuff you do. And at one point I remember saying to him, stop telling me it's going to be okay. Just stop. Because it felt like he wasn't joining me in that moment. It felt like he was like, they're there or something, even though it wasn't intentional. Everything is good intention, but I kind of wanted him to say, this is really crappy.
Right.
And I feel it too.
Yeah.
And he thought he needed to hold it together and be strong and, you know, not say those things. And so once we kind of allowed space for him to just not have to be the cheerleader and for me to be able to both share and cry and do whatever I needed to do, but also respect he needed to have a timeout and to build a boundary around some of it so that, okay, we're going to go to a baseball game and fertility conversations off limits. And so we're going to just try to focus on that. Right. It's important to connect emotionally. It's important to connect physically, you know, when you're not just ovulating and, you know, all of these things. I mean, this is hard to talk about. It's hard to live through. But I think if we all remember that everybody has the best intentions, but we are needing to like turn up the volume on our adaptive communication skills.
Right.
To just, this is what I need.
So talk to me. I'd love for you to like put on your therapist hat for a minute and say to me, like, if somebody was asking, tell me how to make my marriage, or that adaptive communication, what are some, I love how you describe that, because so many times I'll hear a man say to me, a male client or a partner of the client that I have will say to me something like, well, if I express my disappointment, my sadness, my anger, I'll feel bad that I'm layering it on her, and I'll make her feel bad, especially if it's female primary infertility struggle. Right. So talk to me a little bit about that on a very practical level. What are some of the direct ways that you navigated that?
Well, I think that language is really important. And I really appreciated that my husband always said, it's not your problem, you know, even though it was my ovaries that were sort of the, you know, at fault, so to speak. But he really phrased it as that this is something we're going through. And so I think having, from a husband's perspective or a partner's perspective, whoever's not going through the physical stuff, having just the language, a team language, you know, this is something we're going through, and I'm sorry your body is taking the brunt. And I feel badly too. But not if it weren't for your ovaries, you know, like, and not saying like, oh my God, this is going to cost so much money, you know, because then you're like, oh my God, I'm costing so much. It's more that, you know, it is really expensive and we're going to do our best to sort it through. And what we need to focus on is, you know, how to make sure you feel okay and that we make the right decisions for ourselves, and kind of taking, like a bit of a pragmatic approach, but not shying away from sharing, I'm sad too. And it's okay to be sad without blaming.
Sure.
Right? Like sometimes we want to identify the source of the sadness or the anger or the frustration, and there comes as little grains of blame or fault or something. But, you know, this is a medical infertility on either side. And it's often, you know, both partners, there's an equal percentage of it being male factor versus female factor if it's a heterosexual couple. So it really is very common on both sides. It's just perceived as a woman's issue because our bodies, you know, take on most of the physical activities of all of it. But I think being able to just connect on that it's infertility or just fertility. I hate the word infertility, kind of, but that it's, you know, it's like the fertility challenges that we're going through. That's what's at fault, not somebody's body or somebody's ovaries or some, you know, or, you know, and for women too, I was, like I said, my husband for 10 years, he didn't want to get married for 8 of those years. And I was like, if we just tried when I was 23, you know, like we'd have 3 kids by now. And, you know, I can't fault him for not being ready. I can't go down the sort of rabbit hole of regret with that. You know, he wasn't ready. And I had to respect that. He also reminds me, if we had a kid at that point, we'd probably be divorced. So you know, I respect that. So it's kind of letting go of blame and all of that, and just saying like, I hear you, this sucks, and I want to do what I can to make it better. And, you know, it's nobody's job to make the other person feel better.
I would think also part of it is like, if we identify it as the woman, because I'm talking woman to woman right now, the woman also has to be, or the primary recipient, if the female is the primary concern, she has to also be able to say, this is what my needs are.
Yeah.
I think it's, you know, having the male or the partner anticipate what the needs are is kind of also like that rabbit hole, like making sure that she can be able to identify what are her needs in order to get those needs successfully met as a team.
Yeah. And I think it's not feeling embarrassed about things. You know, sometimes I would preface with like, I know this sounds crazy, but, or something like that, because feelings are always valid, even if they appear crazy. And so I think if there's an acknowledgement of like, I know this is sort of a lot or something like that, but it would really feel good to me if, or I really need to talk about this for 10 more minutes, even though we're going in a circle, just so I can kind of vomit everything I need out, and then I'll be good,
And I think also going on to the stereotypical, like kind of caricatures of how we deal with issues, I see a lot of women who really need that time to just process it out loud. And sometimes their partners are like, I can't handle this anymore. This is all we're talking about. Like, so giving kind of time limits to it, I think also was something that you mentioned.
Exactly. Yeah, those boundaries are really good. And sometimes, I got kind of good at crying it out in a way that felt contained. Like he'd come home and he'd be like, oh gosh, like what, I'd be like, and I'd have my computer and I found something that, whatever it was. And I would just say, I just need to cry it out. And I'm not going to talk about why or what it's just the pure emotion of sadness needs to exit my body through my face.
Right.
And then he would like sit with me and I was like, and you don't need to say it's going to be okay. You just have to sit and witness and hold and contain the best you can. Yeah. Invitation to cry too. He never took it. I've never seen my husband cry before. He is a rock of a human. Like sometimes it concerns me. But I'd cry and then I'd be like, I have a little bit more. And then I would just like let it out and just find a way to get it out, because sometimes that just physical act of it needs to just come out. And then making sure your partner isn't freaked out by, oh my God, she can't stop crying. It's just like, no, this is the activity of the moment. and we're going to be okay with it. Right. And then you move on, you make dinner, and then you watch a comedy show and you laugh a little bit about something unrelated, and you try to live your life,
Right. Who were some of the other supports that you had in place beyond your husband, who was able to also be there for you to hold and contain?
Yeah, that was kind of a hard thing. I mean, my family was really involved. It was definitely a family effort. I'm very close to my family. I was always very open with my family. And I had an acupuncturist. Her name was Gilly. She's in the movie. And she became my therapist, basically. She was a fertility specific acupuncturist. And I would just go in there and be like, and she'd say, Mayale, your baby is not going to come to you if you keep crying, or like whatever. But she was so great. And she just like had a lot of knowledge, and that made me feel safe. Mm-hmm. I had a couple, I don't know, I guess they'd be like mentors in a way. So through the film, I was interviewing people and some of them started as people I knew that were a bit older than me. One woman is like, I tutored her kid, years ago. The kid's now in college or whatever. And when I was tutoring her second son is when all of this started. And she was like, when are you gonna have kids? And I was like, we'll see. And then 2 years later, she asked again, and I was like, well, here's what's happening. And then she shared that one of her children, and she's in the movie actually, was adopted, and the other was an egg donor and a surrogate, or she had through an egg donor and a surrogate. And I was like, huh? Like, wow. That's, you're real, and your kids are, everybody's happy, and oh my gosh. And she started meeting me for coffee, and I would just text her even though we weren't friends. I mean, and I stopped tutoring her kids after a while. They were too old and whatever, but we kind of built this kinship around her being like a fertility mentor. And I had a couple other people like that, a bit older than I, who had sort of survived, like the infertility survivors or whatever. They had kids who were 8 years old, 15, whatever. And it made me so at ease to see that family, like healthy children, families, people survived intact. Yeah. She's still standing, and it's always a part of a person when you go through this, but it wasn't here, in the foreground of every single thing. And, so that was really helpful. And my blog was really helpful. I kind of created that myself, but then I just started following other people's stories through, and people were updating through, there was sort of comments. I'm really not tech savvy, so this was like a huge deal for me, but and then I'd be thinking about somebody in New Zealand who I'd never met, who I knew was doing a transfer, and I could just on the blog to publicly be like, hey, thinking of you. And then she would update and other people would comment, and it kind of became a little bit of a space to share, which I thought was so helpful.
Yeah, for sure. I thought that was such a fascinating part of the film. Also, how you introduced those multiple couples with different kinds of stories in their own fertility experiences and how they grew their families, and
Yeah.
how it was so magnificent to see how people they're obviously very honest, and it didn't brushstroke it as to be like,
Yeah.
oh, look, now the story ends and it's all happy pretty. And it was
Yeah.
very authentic, in that it created a space where there was a conversation about how hard it is, even afterwards, even
Yeah.
after you won the prize,
Yeah.
that it doesn't leave you. It doesn't
Yeah.
leave you. What is that like for you today? Like after that first experience?
Yeah, I think, I think this idea that it doesn't leave, I think interviewing those people really instilled hope for me. That was like the biggest message, is that, okay, if I'm open to how I'm going to get a child, it will happen in some way, even if it has to fall from the sky. I don't know. Like it will figure this out if I'm open, if my heart and my mind can be open.
Right.
And I also saw that there were unintended positive consequences somehow. That people who had gone through this, even though they were miserable and anxious and stressed out and sad and crying and had so much loss and physically felt not good and gained weight, and et cetera, that the aftermath there was something positive that came out of the relationship, that you felt closer to your partner because of what you'd gone through, that there was a different kind of experience that you came to the table with in terms of parenting. And, not to say that people don't parent fine without, going through fertility stuff, but I think there's just such a level of consciousness that comes to the table. And I was interested in that. And I thought, okay, this is terrible, but there's going to come a point where I'm not going through this anymore. And hopefully where I'm parenting, and somehow this will get integrated into my identity and myself in a way that can be positive. I mean, there were a lot of things that weren't and that were hard, but I think if you can turn lemons into lemonade in some way, that makes you a stronger person when you kind of survive something like this.
Right. That's that whole post-traumatic growth experience.
Sure,
After
absolutely.
the trauma. I also think it's so important to remind anybody who's listening to the interview that it's something that each person has to find on their own. It's not for me to come and say to you, you'll be a better mom in the future because of this, or your marriage will be stronger because you went through it.
And you don't know. Some people divorce, and that's a truth. But I think what is true is that with crisis comes opportunity. And that's that Chinese symbol, right? It's the same as crisis is opportunity. And I kind of love that, because even if your marriage, let's say, doesn't survive, or that you will grow, because there's no other choice. You will change in some way, and hopefully some of those ways will result in some kind of insight or some kind of shift that feels like a good thing as opposed to a terrible thing.
Yeah, I love how you describe that. One of the things that you mentioned before was this idea of being the supports that you have in place and the family. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about your relationship with your parents and kind of their involvement in your experience, because I think one of the things that we hear so frequently is, I want to tell my parents or my in-laws, but they're so intrusive, or I don't want to say a word, but they're asking all these awful questions, and kind of that struggle between privacy and public and support. Talk to me a little bit about your experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just so individual, depending on how your family is and the dynamics you have and all that stuff. I'm very fortunate that I have a very open family, and I guess there were moments where it felt intrusive, or sometimes just frustrating to have to re-explain things. My dad, I was like, Dad, it's an egg. It's not like, oh, can you just get it right? But for the most part, they were really trying, and they were really open and really made it seem like we're going to find a baby, like we're going to do this. And that was helpful. And I think it was helpful for me to share. And it took a little bit of time. I mean, we were trying. I'm not telling him, I ovulated last night. No, and not, it's like I wasn't sharing that bit. But when it got to a point, I remember he said, "Where's my grandkid already?" or something like that. And this was after like a year of trying. And I was like, actually, it's been really hard. And he was the one who got us into the RE, actually, now that I think about it. My cousin is an anesthesiologist. And, and he asked me, he said, I'm gonna email Howard, because I know he works for a guy, or, something like that. And, and so it became like, okay. And then my cousin was like involved in, helped me set up appointment and, and all that kind of stuff. And I was just really open and willing to get all the help that I could with that comes comments that sometimes you're like, I can't, right? You're like, I don't even. So you have to be willing to take both sides of it and to be able to be really open and say, hey, I'm going to share this with you, but here are the do's and don'ts right now. This is a specific thing. They don't know how to talk about it. You know, they don't, and so I just would say, like, don't ask me about this stuff and let me come to you, or it really is helpful when blah, blah, blah. But again, it's that very clear communication skills that have to get the volume turned up super duper, because I wanted that support. I wanted them to know, you know. I also felt really bad when something didn't go well. And I was like, oh God, I got to tell my parents, you know. And I remember we did one last transfer. It's not even in the movie. We did so many other like transfer, like we had to edit at some point, but we did this one transfer and I drove to my parents' house just to get the data. And it was summer. And I remember, I don't know, my mom was wearing shorts. I was like, why is my mom wearing shorts? Like, it was just this weird moment where it was like hot in their house and we're sitting by the phone and we're like waiting. And then it's calls and this is our very last possible embryo, you know, and that, you know, thought of at the time. And, you know, we get this news and my dad just starts crying. And he says, you know, he goes, I don't know how much more you guys can take. And he's just crying. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh God, you know, I'm just like, what? I don't, you know, but it was so meaningful to me. And I felt both kind of guilty and bad that I should drag them along, but I knew they wanted to be there with me, you know, and that made it okay for some reason, you know. So anyways, sorry, that's a bit of a long-winded way to answer.
It offers so much important content. I mean, I think that definitely that idea of like, I think one of the, you didn't quite use the term, but what I hear is this feeling of like, I feel guilty that I haven't given my parents a grandchild, or that my parents will, or I don't want to hurt my mom. And if she knows I'm hurting, then she'll hurt. So really kind of trying to find the balance between sharing, not sharing, but ultimately I love that idea of turning up the volume on certain components of the conversation. What do I need from you? And can you, but also knowing, can your parents offer that? Struggle.
Yeah. And that's a very, you know, specific to everybody's family kind of thing.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Parent is very gossipy. That my dad is a little bit. So, you know, and so I would say, listen, ask me before you post something on Facebook, or I'm not on any social media, you know, but sometimes he gets a little happy with stuff and is, you know, whatever, or, you know, don't send a mass email about, you know, a pregnancy if it happens too early, you know, just stuff like that, you know, people have good intentions and they get excited or they get upset or whatever the situation is, and they'll just do what they think is appropriate. And just sometimes it doesn't sit well for us. And so it's trying to catch those things on the front end, knowing the type of parent you have, you know, like, don't tell grandma yet, I want to be the one, or whatever.
Right. Right. Absolutely. What would you say some of your like primary takeaways at this point are for, and I don't know if you want to do any kind of update of where you are today, or you don't have to. I'm just wondering when you talk about the post-traumatic growth, or the what comes next for you as a mom of now a pretty big kid, what would you say some of your experiences have been of the post-traumatic growth, or the growth that has come next?
I think, so my child just turned 4, and, you know, I definitely feel somewhat removed from the fertility journey, but it's so I'm so quick to get back there with my clients. And that's a very raw and real experience that happens in the room. And it's not because I haven't processed my stuff. It's because it's just so real for everybody. So I think it's given me this layer or this level of empathy that I couldn't have had otherwise. But you know, I think that it's a part of who I am now. It's part of my language. It's part of the work that I do. I'm really interested in donor conceived kids, and really trying to create, especially for embryo donation, but, you know, for all donor conceived children, really creating healthy ways to talk about it within a family and how to support that, you know, so it's like my whole sort of life has shifted to really focus on these kind of fertility related issues and stuff. As a mom, I mean, I still just being able, like when I say the word daughter, I still feel like what,
Whoa.
yeah. And after having her, we did another transfer of her full genetic sibling, and that didn't work out, and that was devastating, and I actually did get pregnant naturally and then had a loss at 10 weeks. And so it's like these things where I was like, I thought I was done with all that stuff, and then stuff kept and I was like, it's been a decade. I've been doing this for nearly a decade.
Right.
Like,
Right.
I'm all done, and so there's been some shifts too. I always anticipated having at least two kids. Well, I would say two kids. I say at least, my husband's like two kids, but I always thought I'd have, two kids, or, I have sometimes guilt about not being able to have a sibling for my child. And, I know that's really common for people, but I did the best that I could.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all I can offer, and
Right.
nobody has, died of being an only child. And so it's constantly having to shift perspectives a little bit, and, and noticing, I think for a good amount of time, I was still kind of in that, well, maybe I can get pregnant, or, and that I just kind of put behind me. Like, I always joke, okay, when I'm 45, I'll get pregnant with twins naturally. Like, that's what's going to happen. But it's kind of, but I've been able to let it go and be just grateful for what I have in front of me, as opposed to longing, because I just didn't want to be in process anymore, and I didn't want to long anymore. And so when that last transfer of the embryo, we flew to Seattle, we did the whole thing. I mean, and of course it's like another 8-month process because my body wouldn't work, and right, and all that kind of stuff. So it's always like this thing. And after, of course, I was really upset when it didn't work, but I also felt this little bit of relief of, I'm done with the fertility stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, chapter closed.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt both sad and kind of weird in it, but also just happy to be in a different phase, and happy that I had the control over that. Yes, we could try an egg donor, and we could try something else, and we could, but we accepted this is how it all played out, and we have an incredible kid, and so we're just going to focus there. So
I love that. I love that. I love how you frame that, but I also feel like, and I also see that that's one of the biggest struggles that women have, is, when do I say that I need to stop, and I need to put it, and there is no concrete answer to that.
Yeah, of course. And and I think for me, it was when my husband was like, we're done. Like, I mean, I can't say that every month. I don't I'm like, well, maybe if I'm still not getting my period, maybe, but I'm not tracking. I'm not, like, thoughts are there sometimes of like, oh, what if, or could I, or, I think, and also hormonally, my body's kind of in a very strange place, even though I shouldn't be, but because of my ovarian condition, I'm headed towards menopause a bit earlier. So I'm realistic about, what's in my cards. Mm-hmm. And it's really personal. And I think people really need to do, everything they feel that they need to do in order to feel okay. But they're not the only person involved often. If you have a partner, there's a negotiation that happens, so for us, it felt okay to go, okay, we're done at least engaging in
the active versus the passive.
Yeah, mm-hmm. Exactly.
So I know that you need to go. This has been an extraordinary time together, and I'm so grateful. I wonder if you would just end off with a couple of thoughts, therapist to therapist. What are some of your top points that you would like if there was a therapist watching this conversation? And what would you want any therapist out there who might interface with a woman who is struggling, or a couple who are struggling with fertility? What do you want them to know? Top 3 things that you would like to make sure every therapist knows, whether you specialize or don't specialize. But
yeah, what are yours? What are your specifics? I often get, one thing I talk a lot about in my work with people is this idea of like, just the openness. And, I always gauge in the beginning, like, what are you open to? What's okay for you? Mm-hmm. And knowing that shifts through the process. Mm-hmm. Like, I didn't wake up one morning thinking embryo donation was a very exciting plan, to be honest. Right. I mean, I hate to say that out loud, but it's true. Yeah. But it's this shift. And so I kind of define it for people in my sessions as sort of like starting out at this place where an idea may feel really uncomfortable and weird and upsetting, and just being able to see and provide the space to see if that shifts to curious or interesting or something else, and that's, and so it's like, as a therapist in the room, we're holding space for that. Okay, this is so upsetting, and we're going to meet you where you're at and be there and support that and understand, with also just this idea, like, is it going to change? Is there an opportunity for something to change? And being able to sit through, okay, what is interesting about it? What is curious about it? What does it mean to you? What does it mean to your partner? What does it mean to your culture? How much of a loss is this, right? How devastating, and how, is there any hopefulness, or is there anything that does excite you? And and then seeing if it shifts one more time to something that feels like a possibility. Absolutely. And then exploring that, right? So I kind of see these like 3 doors almost. I'm giving away all my secrets now, but I think it's like an important thing for a therapist to hold, that somebody might come in saying, no, I'm never going to do this. And that's totally fine. And we have to respect people's choices. And it's not to persuade somebody to do one thing or another, but rather to just see, and just kind of have this lens of, I'm just going to like open the space for you to explore what you need to explore. And that happens over time. And sometimes it doesn't happen. And sometimes people go from one thing and then they jump to something totally different. Yeah. I think another thing that I think is important is, and very upsetting for some people, but the idea of going through the process and then choosing to be child-free. I don't think any therapist, even though the goal is to have a child, should push that on anybody. I mean, obviously, sometimes if you just mention it, you'll know your clients, obviously, but that is a resolution also. It's not just how are we going to get a kid, that it's, sometimes the choices, we've done all that we've tried and maybe it doesn't feel right to do X, Y, and Z. And so we have to embrace something else. Right. So I think that having all resolutions on the table, even if people aren't ready to talk about them, to just hold it and sort of know that that's available. I think that's important. Yeah. And I think a big piece for me is also helping people advocate for themselves. Mm-hmm. I see more and more people saying, well, I don't know if I can ask this, or, maybe I shouldn't do this, or, and I think it's just my style, but I'm like, oh no, you can ask this, and let's see how it's comfortable for you to get the information that you need. Yeah. Because people are very hesitant and they feel like they don't have the right, or, oh, but the doctor knows best, or the agency, or, whatever it is. And I think if you are not heard, and if you don't have the information that you feel you need, even if you have to ask it, and people are like, oh, I'm so annoying, I keep asking. Ask it again. Yeah. Ask it in email if you need it to be written down so you can see it. Ask it and take a note. Help support your clients who have more anxiety to write down all the questions they have before they go into the doctor's office. So then when they're there, they're not going, okay. And then they come into your office and you go, I wanted to say this, but I feel like I couldn't, and he was too busy. And, just really, like, this is such an emotional thing. We have to take care of ourselves, and we have to support our clients to take care of themselves and to really be able to ask what they need to ask.
Oh, perfect. Yes. Thank you. Excellent.
Is that okay?
Amazing. Maya, I just want to say thank you to you for spending the time with me. This was a treat. Yeah. I'm a little bit like, fan base over here on the East Coast. I'm just super grateful to have such a meaningful conversation with you. I'm going to stop the recording now and thank you on behalf of Yesh Tikva.
Thank you. Thank you for all the support and the work that you guys do.
Absolutely.